who I will be introducing to us very shortly. I'm sure we all know him. He's going to be discussing with us some very exciting things about success ingredients for the things we can begin to do and the things we can begin to look at after COVID for our businesses after this season. I will try to keep a track of every thought that keeps on flying in. Please, for everybody who is listening, help me guide those who are coming on board on how to connect with their audio. In case anybody is complaining that they cannot hear, it's because they don't know how to connect with their audio. So if it's Android, there's a way to connect. If it's iOS, there's a way to connect. And if you're connecting with your computer, there's a way to connect as well. Of course, many people are still trying to come on board. I'll keep on adding them as we get the prof to begin to talk. So very quickly today, I hope you can all hear me. So please, for a test, if you can hear me, just type in the window, I can hear. That way, everybody knows that people can hear and that if they are not hearing, they need to do something about it themselves. So I can hear people saying I can hear. Very good. So today, I'd like to introduce to some and present to all Professor Utomi. Of course, Professor Utomi doesn't need much of an introduction. He's a professor of social and political economy, environment of business and entrepreneurship at the Lagos Business School, which he co-founded in 2003. He was, at that time, also has been a scholar in residence at the Harvard Business School at the American University in Washington, D.C. For those of us who do not know Professor Utomi, Professor Utomi is involved in civil society. He's an active participant in civil society, where he has founded some non-governmental organizations like CVL, etc. He also has a key leadership in Apex private sector associations, including Lagos Chamber of Commerce, National Council of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Nigerian Employers Positive Association. He's active in national speaking circuit, especially on subjects that have to do with growth, economics, comparative development, economics, leadership, the cost of oil and China's economic surge and growing influence in Africa. Professor Utomi is collaborated fairly frequently with the Center of Strategic and International Studies in Washington and in Chatham House, UK. He has also written and commissioned papers for the UK's DFID, including collaboration with colleagues from Oxford on the political economy of growth in Nigeria. He's a visiting scholar at the Hopkins School of Advanced of International Studies. He was one of the top 10 Nigerians in the Silverbird Awards for Living Legends in 2009. The Monster Sky. He has reached over several different endeavors, becoming one of Nigeria's top managers in manufacturing before the age of 33, reaching advisory to the president Evan, earning 2 masters at the conference. In business, political economy, and media studies. These are things that we all know about the prof. I just want to get a quick introduction of him in before we commence. So today we're going to be having the opportunity of, I hope everything is all right with our internet. We're going to have an opportunity of having the opportunity to listen to him today. He's also been a business angel. He has helped to found a number of companies. He's been a presidential aspirant in Nigeria 2 times. He's been a gubernatorial aspirant in one of the biggest parties in Nigeria just last year. He's the chairman of A2W Limited. So he is my chairman. Please, I'd like you to join me today as we welcome Professor Utomi. Please, in the chat boxes, you can just say you are welcome or put your hands together for him. And then we'll have some silence on the chat segment as we listen to Professor Utomi. While he speaks with the screen clearly before him, I will go ahead to keep on doing all the admin work that ensures that our gathering together can stay staying, so that we can add the people that want to come on board and we can ensure that our boards are not staying. Okay, so very quickly today, I'd like you to join me as I welcome Professor Utomi. Sir, are you ready?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I am glad that I am able to join this fairly large gathering. I hope everybody's keeping safe. That's the first and most important part of what is on the agenda. And I'd probably like to start with how safe we're keeping, because I think that there is a tendency for us to invent a number of reasons why this is not as terrible as it could be, so it doesn't happen to black people. Heat does not allow it to happen. We had malaria before, nothing can happen. Okay, everything is possible. But the most important thing is to recognize the place of pandemics in human history and how they have changed the world and are likely to continue to change the world, how they will change our world. This particular one will change our world. And therefore to ask ourselves the question, are we really ready to manage what will happen? But to be able to manage what will happen, we have to survive it. And to just give a sense for how incredible these pandemics can be, the bubonic plague took out 1/4 of the entire population of Europe only a couple of 100 years ago. 1/4 of the population of Europe. The last great pandemic, the Spanish influenza, by accounts took out 21 million people, I guess, in Europe, 50 million worldwide. Now, if you consider the population of the world then and what it is today, you will see the capacity for devastation. And then another point of history that I like also to emphasize in these things is if you look at how Europe conquered, quote unquote, the New World, North and South America, the great writers of European history like to make it out to be that the great firepower of Europe overcame these natives and they took over. But if you want proper evidence, go and read one of the best writings on world history by Jared Diamond. And the book, he's written 2 major books, several books, of course, but the 2 that are most important for our conversation, one is titled Guns, Germs, and Steel. And the other one is titled Collapse, which is really a story about how societies have failed through human history. Now, one of the things that we learn remarkably is, let's take the example of Cortez and the Spanish conquistadores who landed in Mexico. The Aztec civilization, just like the Inca civilization further south, were significantly developed civilizations of warriors, some people, millions of them. How come a boat of 600 and something people manages to have enough firepower to overtake millions of people who are great warriors? Well, the true story is that these plagues, these pandemics that hit Europe, started mainly in Europe for a simple reason, that pandemics are the result of man's contact with animals. For thousands of years, a man was a hunter-gatherer, killing wild beasts and eating or wild fruits. Then man began to make the transition from being the hunter-gatherer to becoming the farmer-herder. Man began to produce food and began to try to domesticate those wild animals to make them food, so that we all eat chicken now, we rear cattle, we eat the meat and all of that. This process of contact between man and animal led to transmission of diseases from animals to man. The germs led to many of those pandemics in Europe. Now, having hit Europe, the Europeans developed immunities. Food production rose in the world from an area generally referred to as the Fertile Crescent, running from Egypt through to what is Iraq and so on today. From there, Europe as we know it today, became the next beneficiary, spread. So these pandemics hit those parts of the world. They developed immunities. When Europeans landed in the New World, they interacted with the locals, and these locals became infected with measles, with smallpox, and all of that, which the Europeans had become already immune to, and this wiped out 99% of the population of the Americas were wiped out by these diseases, these germs. That's how the Europeans were able to now dominate and take over those parts of the world. Wow. Why am I telling these stories? To explain that these pandemics have incredible consequences for human history. They've always had. If we are not particularly careful, it could wipe out our entire population. So there should not be things we joke about or find small theories that make us comfortable. We don't know where we are on the curve, but we need to be more careful. And most of us were watching a few minutes ago the burial of Baba Kiari. And with all the preaching, even at the burial, there was no social distancing, nothing. All the things that could infect people and lead to the spread of this virus were taking place. So my first urging to all of us is to stay safe. As much as possible, maintain this social distancing, wash our hands as frequently as we can manage it, and then pray a lot to God that we may be spared. And if and when we then come through it, what are we going to do to rebuild our world? We live in a very unequitable world, and a lot of it was inflicted by self. I like very often to begin to make the point that one of the great lines from Peter Drucker that I never forget is that Peter Drucker, before he died, made the point that at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1900, for example, the difference in the quality of life between the average African and the average European was marginal. Okay, nobility lived much better, but the average African and the average European, the quality of life was marginal in difference. By the close of the 20th century, the difference in the quality of life between the average African and the average European was like night and day. What happened during this 1 century that separated the world and led to such humongous inequalities? A professor at Princeton who won the 2015 Nobel Prize for Economics called Angus Deaton chose to focus on one of those, on health and marginally education. Angus Deaton's book, The Great Escape, Health, Wealth, and the Origins of Inequality, goes into some depth to analyze how, well, the West grew rich and the critical role of healthcare, the germ theory of disease, in enabling this separation between the West and the rest of us. This is why it's a tragedy that the kinds of leadership we have managed to develop in many of our countries have not understood enough the importance of massive investments in education and healthcare, because therein lies the great separation. So, if we're going to go forward to become more prosperous people, one of the things that we must focus on is our healthcare. Now, how do we generate the kinds of leadership, economic, political, social, that can enable us change our own world so that our people will all make the great escape, so that the quality of our lives will improve? My take is that we must begin with self-mastery. We must begin with the ability to know ourselves, to conquer ourselves, and in being able to conquer ourselves, to see tomorrow more clearly, and in seeing tomorrow more clearly, conceive of a better tomorrow we'd like to see and work our way towards building that tomorrow. Now, for years now, I have spent time trying to develop a way of learning that will make doing that a little easier. And I have called it the pedagogy of the determined. Now, let me say something about it. By the way, the word itself, the pronunciation of that word can get us into a lot of trouble. Americans will call it pedagogy. Pedagogy. I was talking to an American ambassador to Nigeria, and I kept pronouncing like a Nigerian, pedagogy. And the guy kept wondering what I was talking about until I realized I was talking to an American. I said to him, pedagogy. I said, oh, yeah, pedagogy. It's the mode of teaching, the way that people learn from the way that you deliver knowledge to them. The pedagogy of the determined essentially is just a retooling, if you want to call it that, or a rejigging of an idea that was not originally mine at all. Back in the 1960s and 70s, there was a Brazilian educator called Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire wrote a very influential book that was titled The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. The Pedagogy of the Oppressed dealt with the problem with colonized people and why they don't seem to be creative. He identified quite correctly that part of the problem with most of us is that the nature of colonial education was structured to keep us in a maintenance mode. So we go to medical school, become doctors, we're trained to treat malaria, to treat whatever it is, the basic, but we are not trained to overtake those who trained us in thinking and create a better world where you will not have to deal with the problems of basic hygiene, for example. And so we train people in the wole system. They go around checking to make sure that the gutter does not pass through your kitchen and that this, that keeps us safe, but has not created the new medical facility that will help us deal with, say, cancer or whatever. Paulo Freire argued that the colonial method of educating people, the pedagogy of the colonial period, saw the human mind, the brain, as we see a piggy bank. You have this little can with a hole that you drop in coins as a child. It's saving money. When you drop it and it's full, you go and open it and see all this money. So the brain, it gets deposits of just about enough knowledge to keep things running, maintain things, great civil servants, wonderful administration, deploy the wole people to make sure this has happened. Everybody gets sick a little, he goes to this doctor and all of that, and things are running. Yet we are not making any giant strides, and those societies are pulling away. I was completely swayed by the logic of the pedagogy of the oppressed. However, I had a challenge with the way that Paulo Freire provided a solution. Now, part of the way that Freire provided his solution was to say, look, because Freire was a Marxist. Freire's argument was that you, as it were, soak the potential learner in Marxist ideology. When you then have soaked him enough in Marxist ideology, he knows now the way the world is, and you ask him to imagine the world that he wants to build. If he can then imagine, vision that world, you can then say to him, what kind of learning, what kind of knowledge do you think will take you to creating that world that you have just visioned? And then he chooses his own kind of learning, and through that becomes an agent in changing his world towards that envisioned world. The fact that the stimulator is Marxist ideology, for me, was a problem. Not just because of Marx, but because ideology has a way of limiting you. The biggest challenge to capitalism today, in my view, is exactly that. Capitalism, which was evolving already in Europe, the institutions were emerging already. When Adam Smith in 1776 wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations, froze capitalism, or the doctrine of laissez-faire, free enterprise, froze it into an ideology. And since then, economists from mainly the Anglo-Saxon world, the UK, the US, have treated capitalism as holy grail, and so have not allowed themselves to consider options on how you can achieve growth. And part of what shocked them with the emergence of the Asian countries, the so-called Asian economic miracle, is that they were not paying attention to any other mode. And the model that the Japanese encouraged in the East suddenly led to greater growth in economic development and all of that. And so the fact of ideology as the essence of Freire, for me, was not appropriate. So I took the basic idea of beginning learning with a vision, and that's the important point. When you want to learn, you should know enough to then have a vision of what you want to do with knowledge. And the way that I have approached it is to say, why don't we expose a learner to what changed the world? So expose them to what happened in Southeast Asia. What was Lee Kuan Yew's contribution to transforming Singapore? What happened in China, that a country that was the civilization of the world towards the end of the Ming dynasty, about 400 years ago, went to sleep, and just declined as a civilization until the 1970s, when Deng Xiaoping emerged as leader and made the point about the importance of knowledge and opening up and all of that. And China's new ascendancy began. Expose the learner to Brazil, and why Brazil was considered for a long time the country of great potential that went nowhere. And what happened with the transformation of a leader called Enrique Fernando Cardoso, who as an academic and an intellectual was the leader of a school of thought in political economy referred to as dependency theory, Latin Americans call them independistas, the people who believed that the south of the world was underdeveloped by the north, and that the nature of the relationship between the center and the so-called periphery created underdevelopment. But he dominated this school at ECLA, the Economic Commission for Latin America, until he returned to his home country, Brazil, after the military left office and became foreign minister. At the time, the Brazilian economy was a moving disaster. Inflation was so high that if you went into a store, before you finish shopping, the prices may change 3 times from when you enter the store to when you have to pay.
Wow.
And the lifespan of the finance minister was 3 months. And he was made the foreign minister. And as foreign minister, he watched one finance minister after the other. 3 months, they go, another one comes. And then one day he was challenged by the president to become finance minister. And before he could think about it, they had announced it on radio that he was the new finance minister.
Wow.
And he had to ask himself, okay, there was Cardoso. This is what Cardoso believed in, has preached as an academic all his life. But now, there's the question of how Brazil will survive. It's not about Cardoso's thoughts anymore. And Cardoso was able to assemble some of Brazil's brightest young economists and say to them, look, fight as hard as you will about what we should do. When you are nearing a solution, invite me in. And whatever is agreed to, doesn't matter if that, is the opposite of everything I've stood for, I will use my clout with the people to support it. And let's move forward. Because that was the beginning of the end of Brazil's horrible troubles. The decision was that Brazil should globalize rather than go into what the dependistas had been recommending. People like Osvaldo Sonkel and others had talked about selective delinking from international capitalism. Those set of economic policy choices that Brazil then made led quickly to a cessation of inflation, and Brazil began to grow as an economy. And of course, as you all probably now know, people of Brazil said, Professor Cardoso, sorry, you have to come and run for president. And Cardoso became president of Brazil. And from his tenure, Brazil stabilized remarkably, was growing significantly, and he was succeeded by Lula Inácio da Silva. Some of the policies that were drafted in this house that I was speaking from into the so-called manifesto of the APC, as the vice president said in some remarks he made a few months ago, that he, myself, and Wale Edun drafted that manifesto in this house. Were borrowed from those ideas from Lula da Silva's time, but evidently we have poorly implemented them here. And really the trick in those policies was in implementation. So teach that to these learners. Teach at the micro level. We've talked macro now about countries. Teach them at the micro level how companies beat competition. Take some famous examples. How did Canon, this small company fiddling with cameras in Brazil, manage to topple Xerox, the company that taught the world to copy? How did Komatsu give a company like Caterpillar a fight of its life in the earth-moving equipment sector? When you teach all of these to the learner, you then say to the learner, with this broad view of transformation in human history, can you view the world that you would like to see 30 years from now? Deep reflection This is slow thinking, not fast thinking. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the work of Kahneman, the Israeli-American thinking fast, thinking slow, reasoning now, not emotion. Conceive of the kind of business you would like to see yourself running in 30 years. Remember that all these great, huge companies that you are seeing, none of them fell from the sky. Sony, which defines quality in global electronics, was set up by two 25-year-old Japanese with less than $500 between them. But they had this obsession of ending the global perception of Japanese products as inferior. In less than one generation, Sony will become the producer of the highest quality electronics goods in the world, giving 5-year warranties. Dream in that nature about this 30 years from now, and then ask yourself, if I am to be the agent of transformation that will take this company from here to this dream I have, what knowledge do I need to have to be able to get there? And therefore plan learning that will facilitate your role as an agent of transformation. How do you get that learning? How do you apply that learning? What are the motivations that are required to keep you from despairing because things went wrong? Once you outline all of those and put them in perspective, you will find that the passion to keep going will be there in spite of snafus, little faults. And the Japanese, many years ago, were asked who an entrepreneur was, and the answer was a very simple one. An entrepreneur is a man who falls down 7 times and gets up 8 times. So what is it about you that will enable you get up when that fall comes? Because it will come. That therefore allows you to run the long distance. It is having a clear vision of where you're going, having the kind of knowledge that will take you there, and recognizing that you are essentially a person who collaborates with others, motivating those people in a manner that these shared goals that you have never leave your front view mirror, so that together you all accomplish something that assures your immortality. So this is really the essence of the pedagogy of the determined. It has all kinds of components, being able to reduce your vision to a tale by moonlight, because your vision is never very clear until you can get an 8-year-old to understand what you are thinking of. And one of the tools that I use is to make people, when they have conceived of that vision, to be able to tell a story. Assume that they are talking to their grandchildren 50 years from now. They are now retired, and they want to tell a story of how the world changed based on the vision they had. How would they tell that story to a group of 8 and 7-year-olds? Until you can tell that story very, very sharply to those 7 and 8-year-olds in a way that they see, your power of imagination is not complete enough to drive your moving towards this goal that you have set for yourself. So that, in essence, is what the pedagogy or pedagogy of the determined is. Recognizing that society, through human history, has grown very, very, very slowly. But when leaders have emerged, imagination has carried people much further. I like to tell often a small story, so some of the A2W people may have heard this before, of transformation in an area that I am very, very, that's my world, if you want to put it that way. Travel, air travel. I told a story of how in 2008, I started out in January, Saturday morning in January, I think it was even 8th of January or something, I remember. I was a wedding of Ray Eku's daughter, and my wife and I had been asked by the Ekus to be wedding sponsors. My schedule was wild as always. So went from the church. As we were going to reception, I headed to the airport. I caught a flight that afternoon, an Emirates flight to Dubai. Stopped over a night in Dubai because I wanted to visit with somebody. A friend of mine who has a habit of running to Dubai after he loses elections. I won't mention his name. So in 2008, he was on some kind of exile after the elections of 2007. He was there again last year after the elections. So anyway, I visited with him. And then the following day, I took off to Singapore to attend the program. And while I was at Singapore, my friends in Australia were calling me and said, look, every time you come around the corner, you don't come to see us. So, because that was the first week of the operation of the Airbus A380, and the first route it flew was Singapore-Sydney. I thought, okay, let me join those who are flying this aircraft for the first time. So I went on to Sydney from there. Cut a long story short, came from Sydney, I had a talk in Accra. Then I came back a week or two later, I had meetings in Frankfurt in Germany. And then I had something in the UK. Long story short, 3rd April, I believe it was 2008, I was at the CSIS, Center for International and Strategic Studies in Washington. As I was speaking to them, it just struck me, just in the middle of a speech, that the year was 3 months old, and I had been on all continents of the planet: Latin America, North America, Australia, Asia, Europe, Africa. And I said to the audience, if I had to do this 100 years ago, how long do you think it would take me? And one very savvy person said, well, probably all of your lifetime, you may not have managed to finish all of that. And I said, you're absolutely correct.
True.
I've done it in 3 months without being an adventurer, just living my normal life. In 3 months, I've been on every continent of the planet. I said, but you know what? 100 years ago, here in the United States, a professor of physics was giving a talk. And he said, you know, in less than 50 years, man will be able to fly. And the audience burst out laughing. And someone said, why do they allow these professors to drink so much brandy so early in the morning? So obviously, this man is hallucinating. Man, fly. And there was a bishop in the audience who raised his hand and said, yes, my Lord, Bishop said, you know, I want to assure you that only angels can fly. The problem with Bishop Wright, as his name was that obviously his knowledge was limited, but the knowledge of his children were not, because Bishop Wright had two sons who were mechanics called Orville and Wilbur. As all of you know the history, less than 10 years from that event, Bishop Wright's two sons became the first men to fly. And today, people like you and I fly routinely around the world, except when a virus has grounded the airlines. So the difference in imagination and therefore in the ability to lead, two things. One is knowledge, which obviously the bishop did not have, and because he didn't have it, he led himself to believe that only angels could fly. Two is a sense of service. It's that sense of service that makes it easy to collaborate with others to achieve a common goal. That sense of service is tragically part of what is significantly lacking in contemporary Nigerian culture. A sacrificial sense of giving for the good of others to advance the common good. Now, let me tell you, maybe I'll use this as wrap up, and then we can get into a Q&A, which can be more useful. One of my big critics of current liberal democracy, Western liberal democracy, and why the United States is not as effective as it could be, why China seems to be able to manage something like this COVID-19 crisis much better than the US. The dysfunctionality of the US government in extreme partisanship, which we see damaging our own country, preventing us from being able to have a democracy that works. One of the central things in philosophical thinking about democracy and its effectiveness, generally identified with the work of German contemporary philosopher Jürgen Habermas, about modernity and democratic order, is rational public conversation. That a society that has the arena of rational public conversation is one that can bring ideas together in a way a society can make the best choice. That does not happen in our culture, unfortunately, because before you say one thing, Lai Mohammed and his agents will begin to send out fake news about you. And so everybody chooses to stay in their shell, and our country is dying. So the challenge that we have of our society today is a challenge of a double jeopardy of the dysfunction of the US system. Extreme partisanship, as we see in the US, and people cannot think of common good and work together to overcome this common good because of partisanship, and compound it with the fact that we do not even have the infrastructure and other capacities to allow the system to, as the American system, they can run on the fact of their institutions in spite of the dysfunction functioning of Supreme Court, the legal system breakdown, and we don't have the ability to deal with this obsessive, excessive partisanship that has hit us, is that we get into a situation where we find that we all are in it together. There's nowhere to run to. In the past, you could say, a friend of mine, somebody I know, had put out a piece, an opinion piece. I suspect it went viral a few weeks ago. Nowhere to run to, or something like that. Something like a virus hits, and it's a global problem. There's no place for the rich man to run to differently from where the poor man will run to. Everybody gets caught in it.
Mm.
You have your private jet, you can't even fly to London because they wouldn't allow you land. Or when you land, they ask you to turn back, as I'm told happened to one Nigerian rich man who tried to head out. It now has to force us to say, look, how do we create the conditions within which each of us can now push to advance our own interests? My philosophy is that the greatest self-interest is locked into the common good of all. When all of society has good health, then you can build a business that will allow you, if your particular like is private jets, to buy as many as you like. The other person who is comfortable with not flying, doesn't like flying, still live his quiet life with his family in a small place. So part of the challenge of the modern business and the competitive culture is how to simultaneously advance the common good and build the differential advantage for the particular goal sought by the individual or the corporation. We can overcome that in our world if we have people who have a broader moral ethos of the society. And interestingly, a lot of research is beginning to show that what we used to call faith matters, are matters of logic and social nature of our being. It's a huge area that has evolved in study these days of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy coming together. It's a chap called Joshua Green, who runs this center at Harvard. He has written a book titled Moral Tribes. His work, alongside the works of a couple of people, trying to make the basic point that I have been struggling to make on another platform about when something becomes an ideology and it prevents you from thinking. When they are us versus them as a basic way in which you see the world, you become a tribesman. You don't become a slow thinking person who can walk through a problem. The emotion takes over. We have to expand our understanding of the world in which we are, because the failure to do that will take away the possibilities of our being able to realize that one virus taking off in Wuhan in China can ground all of us here. 1 month now, some of us have been working from our homes. Long before the order from Abuja, I had already locked down at least 10 days before that. And so here we are going into at this period. It makes it important that we understand that we and the Chinese are really on the same boat. But we can compete, we can build businesses that we all grow for our own profit. But we have to understand that if we just build that business, one day we can just get shut down like this, and after 4 weeks, that business does not exist anymore. Let me stop there, and let's get into some maybe conversation. Maybe that will be more helpful.
Okay.
So I hope I've been useful.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do is I'm trying to do a limitation on the questions. I think people are really just a limitation on the conversation in the chat groups. So I'm limiting the questions to something like only I can see. So if you are here today and you have questions, we're going to take a few questions. What Prof has laid is the general overview of a very few interesting concepts about leadership, about the pedagogy. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Of, of
Don't worry, we know you are from the middle of Nigeria. You can say pedagogy.
Yeah, so but I like us to ask you, I like us to ask our questions. So if you have a question you want to ask, just throw it into the window there. I see some people are still trying to struggle to come in. But I don't know how much that will do currently. So but if you have a question, please let's put our question there. We have Prof, so please, anything you want to ask about what he has shared, about other thoughts, about the nation, about business after now. Somebody says, Prof, your presentation has been very, very useful. Okay. So that's from Oluwafumi Keani. So I like to open the conversation now for us to ask our questions. So I'll open up the questions so that we can see. If I feel that it's getting too much of add me to the group, I'll revert back to make it private. But I'll open it up now so that I can share. But please ask your questions. Anything you want Prof to answer, if you ask it, I will give it voice. Okay, somebody's asking this. This is from, okay, so a few questions are coming in already. So Prof, hello, sir.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Someone is asking, Dele Bikole is asking, with your experience and exposure, sir, when do you think we will be out of this? The person is talking about this lockdown, and I think the stay at home absolute order.
Yeah, this is really the crux of this matter. My biggest fear with this whole thing is that, well, first of all, it can be much longer than we think. As I think some people thought that they would go in for 2 weeks and then they would just resume life as normal. I think that the people in Italy and Spain is trying to do one or two things, have been in this more than 2 months already. And they keep extending in the UK too. Again, the science in these things, not definitive. In the US, you can see that there is a struggle between schools. And that has led Trump to accuse WHO of all kinds of things. And so the Americans are now trying to move to a different model from the WHO model, in the hope that it will help them unlock things and they go on with it. But typically pandemics, in terms of their span, have been around for 1-2 years. I mean, the Spanish influenza was 1918, 1919. People begin to develop immunities anyway. Maybe what do you call it, a vaccine can come up, all kinds of possibilities. But my suspicion is that when this second round of 2 weeks ends, we will find that we are only just coming to the beginning of the curve. Now, political leaders in our country will then have to make a decision which can be frightening. They may choose, because people are now getting ready to riot, to say, okay, we have opened up, and then the thing will hit through community spread. and people will be dying left, right, center, every which way you look, literally on the streets. Or they might decide, look, it's in people's best interest, even if they're starving, that we don't allow this thing to spread to everybody, because we're just, I mean, that theories that suggest that our own curve will hit around June. I don't know how they calculate these things.
Wow.
You know, so the point is that there won't be, the choice that we made might not be optimal. Wisdom might suggest, look, okay, after these next 2 weeks, there is going to be limited kind of movement under these kinds of conditions. You wear this mask, you do this, only so many kind of people in certain kinds of offices to do certain kinds of things. Might be the wiser thing to do. But if we just assume that, okay, in 10 days, the door is open, everybody business as usual, I doubt it. And if it is done, it's possible politically to so do, we could be wiped out. I've just made the point about the conquistadores and what happened in Latin America or the Americas, the New World. 99% of their populations perished.
Wow.
So it's not a funny thing.
Wow.
We need to be extremely careful.
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, I hear you say that it may be good to evolve some kind of arrangement that still keeps us on lockdown, but allows some basic movements so that people do not starve to death. Am I echoing your words?
Yes, in many ways. I think that we need to keep society running, but we have to do it with, first of all, people recognizing that we are all together in a mess. Police should stop extorting bribe from people, because for them, you know, this is an opportunity to make a little. And so you get them collecting tools from people here and there and compounding things, but they don't know enough to know the damage that they are doing. All they know is that God has buttered their bread for a little greasing. So educating people well is a critical part of this process. So if with well-educated managers of this kind of process, we decide, for example, that offices should be open in shifts of only X number of people in the office at the same time, we may then find that we can get some basic things done over a period. Society is still running until we turn that curve.
Okay. Another question here is, it says, are there places to look into for investment after COVID-19 crisis? What are the subtle areas we can look into? Thank you.
There are many places to look. You know, this is an old line again from me. I like to tell this story. We're definitely going through a recession. It's not a matter of conjecture now. Major, first of all, global recession, Nigerian serious recession. Tough time. Now, as I go into that tough time, it's important to bear in mind that there are people who have become very, very rich in depressions. How did they get rich in a depression? My own overtold story is the story of the Great Depression. I think some years ago, not months ago, I was driving to work one morning, and I was listening to Kunle Shorion's program. I used to run this program on radio. And he was telling this story, which has been told often, about this meeting in Chicago. I think it was in 1925 or something like that. The gathering of the richest men in the world, some of the richest men in the world. And by 1930, 31, the middle of the Great Depression, of those billionaires gathered in that meeting, I don't remember the exact figures now. One or two had committed suicide. One or two were in some sanatorium, and but almost all of them have become pauperized. Because in 1990 and 1929, stock markets crashed. Their wealth just disappeared. People were jumping to death from 50-story buildings and all of that. But while all of this was going, a certain gentleman called R.J. Simplot was trying to think of how to make money in these new troubling times. And a simple logic in economics obviously came to him. When people don't have money anymore, what do? They move to inferior goods. I remember visiting Bangkok in Thailand in 1997, during the Asian financial crisis. There was a market that was called the market of people who used to be millionaires. That's where they went to sell off their Rolls Royces, to sell off their boots and stuff like that. Now, R.J. Simplot thought, guys who eat filet mignon, who eat caviar today, what will they be eating? They will have to go to something so cheap that they can afford. So he began to look for cheap kind of food. In those days, the cheapest food you could find, literally in America, in fact, if you had any money, you didn't want to be seen eating it because it reduced your status. Was potatoes. And he thought to himself, okay, how can I collect a lot of potatoes and preserve them and distribute them? First of all, how do you preserve potatoes so that they don't spoil? He went to a couple of research institutes. And those research institutes said, oh, potatoes are one of the easiest things to preserve. All you have to do is dehydrate them, take the water out of the thing. And you can store them for very long periods of time. To use them again, all you have to do is put them back in water, rehydrate them, and all the properties of potato return. So he chose to cut all the potatoes into strips and pack them in sacks. And because this thing had such a low reputation, he thought he should call these strips of potatoes that he had cut something more funky. So he called them French fries. So when you then bring out these cut strips of potatoes, put them in water and fry them, you have this lovely thing called French fries. And he began to sell them. And people were buying because they were so cheap. He almost picked them up on the streets of Idaho for nothing. Along the line, he ran into a guy called Ray Kroc, who founded McDonald's. And between them, they hit a partnership that put some of those French fries beside the hamburger. And it became the ultimate American staple. And R.J. Simplot died worth $3.86 billion US. That's how to get rich in a recession. I give you an example of something that I have been passionate about for some time, been struggling to raise capital on, but I've been developing. An agric industrial town, an aggregation place where you aggregate agric produce and industrial processing of this. With a major outgrower scheme, you can deal not only with the food security problems we have, but you can up the quality of exports.
Okay.
So this is a territory that I am playing in right now and trying to develop.
Okay.
And I think a lot will happen in agriculture.
Yeah. Okay. Prof, there are over 60 questions.
Oh, yeah.
So I know we can't handle all of them, but at least we'll try so that if you can do 1 minute, 2 minutes, so that we can at least.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I have a question here that says, two basic takeaways for me: vision and service-mindedness.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Someone said two basic takeaways. They have two basic takeaways. Hello?
I hear you.
Yeah, so vision and service-mindedness. It says, what do you do, Abi? What do you do given the highly unstable system in the country and the selfishness of the powers that are controlling the political space in our country? That's question one. And question
I think you talk about service. Can you go to the question again?
Question says, yes, the question is, what do you do given that our system is highly unstable, the country system is highly unstable, and the powers that are controlling the political space are quite selfish?
Mm-hmm.
That's one.
I hear about the powers controlling the space being selfish, but what did you say before that?
The person was sharing their initial lessons. So he was not saying, yes, what do we do given that this system is unstable, the country is unstable, and the powers that be are selfish? And then, would hunger and business closures not wipe us out if lockdown continues? What is the practical suggestion to the powers that be?
Well, that's one of the interesting ones. Farid Zakaria, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, already projected that with what will happen from this COVID-19, countries like Nigeria could go into a revolution. As a foreigner, I already predicted that like 4 weeks ago. This system will not be able to sustain. You will get, what they call it, is it Awawa boys and million whatever. They will take over the streets. They come in anarchy. So if Nigerian elite is smart, we better get together and create a system of support, putting people to work. The kind of thing the Americans did during the Depression, FDR. I mean, it's better for people to be digging a gutter to nowhere and getting paid some money for doing it than to leave them where they are. I made a comment, for example, a couple of days ago, and it was seen as a joke. It's not a joke at all. Shut down the National Assembly for the next 6 months or 1 year. All the money they have budgeted for repairing the place and do all that, use it to create small jobs for poor people. If the National Assembly needs to have a meeting, they can meet on Zoom from their homes. Keep them out for 1 year. But you see, they are so selfish, as the questioner asked, that they will say, no, it can't happen. Then you go and kill all of them. That's the revolution we're talking about. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. So the person is also asking that businesses, even the ones that are essential services today, are suffering. Hello, sir. Businesses, even the ones termed food businesses and essential services, are currently suffering a lot of losses because of the logistics nightmare of getting products to the consumer. Can you hear, sir? Hello?
Hello? I didn't hear the earlier parts, but I hear product to the consumer now.
Yeah, I said that the question goes that companies that are even supplying food that are termed essential services are going through problems now of a lot of wastage and because of this lockdown. What method can we prefer to the government to say this is how you can do this to not destroy even the economy completely, while it's going on?
They've got to have a way of certifying organizations that you can call, quote unquote, essential economic services, so that they have free passage and they can structure the movement of their vehicles. Again, this is where police needs to be re-educated, because police will see the opportunity to harass them, delay them. One of the biggest problems with agriculture in Nigeria is that when a good is produced, food products in Adamawa, it takes the truck many more days to reach Lagos than it should be
Yes, sir.
Because police deliberately delay them at every police checkpoint, knowing that every delay will lead to the spoiling of the good. So the people are in a hurry to give them bribes. In the end, when they get to Lagos, 40% of the good is perished. So we need to literally put escorts with these vehicles to make sure that useless policemen don't prevent them from reaching their goals.
Okay. Someone is asking, so how do young people that are yet to go into business fare coming into the world with this economic situation of the world?
We can create solutions to problems around your neighborhood that people see as actually improving their lives, and they will pay for it. There are too many problems around that just finding small solutions to problems like that is an opportunity for growth. I mean, 20 years ago in Lagos, one of those great opportunities was garbage. Garbage collection in Lagos was a tragedy. And a couple of young people found that without any capital or anything, they just wrote to people in their neighborhood in Bagada and said, look, we can just move your garbage for 50 naira a month or something like that. And we said, yeah, why not? And they just got Omolake and started moving. That's how many of them went into this refuse management business. 30 years ago, Lagos was the biggest dustbin in the world. Everywhere was overflowing with garbage. And we managed to reduce that problem because young people found small things like this. So if they think they can find so many new opportunity areas, they can give those kinds of services. I look at the agriculture value chain I talked about. The amount of things that can be done by young people in those areas. The wholesale produce market concepts that I am developing will need thousands of young people who will be produce agents that can go and negotiate with these farmers and assure a more efficient delivery of their produce to the wholesale produce market. These are hundreds of thousands of jobs. In South Africa, they are major growth paths for young people.
Okay. Someone is asking, he said, thank you, Prof. You spoke on the double jeopardy of partisanship and lack of infrastructure on ground to handle certain challenges. He says, however, would it be wrong to say that ranking amongst these is a core problem of lack of general strength of moral fiber? Consequently, could you shed more light on how important character development is in the course of learning and not just intellectual development?
Character is everything. I'll just tell a quick short story to place character in the hierarchy. And it comes from the motto of a school, government secondary school, Owerri. And I think they borrowed it from a preacher, most likely Billy Graham. It says, work hard, play hard. When wealth is lost, nothing is lost. When health is lost, something is lost. When character is lost, all is lost. And my simple illustration that I use for it is 25 years ago, I used to teach with a video of a certain American billionaire who had gone bankrupt. Was coming out of the tube station in New York, saw a homeless man and said, my goodness, that guy is probably worth much more than me. And the very worst is worth zero. I am worth far less than zero. That billionaire who had gone bankrupt came back to be a billionaire. And by the way, today is the president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. It means that wealth can be lost and regained.
Okay.
Next on health. We all know an extraordinary chap who changed our world with Apple, Steve Jobs. In his mid-50s, cancer claimed him. And if you remember those famous last words of Steve Jobs, there are many videos running around on it. All the money in the world can't save your life. So when health is lost, something is lost. When character is lost, part of the challenge of building this economy is because people perceive Nigeria's national character as people that are not trustworthy. That's part of the reason the economy can grow. So character matters.
Okay, sir. This person is asking, in making society like Nigeria become a people that follow through effective implementation of the great policies that people like yourself have articulated for this nation, what are the things that we can do? What's the best?
Sorry, I missed one or two lines.
He says, what will be your earnest approach to make societies like Nigeria become a people that follow through effective implementation of so many good policies that have been articulated by people like your good self, even the current regime of APC?
Well, biggest challenge with Nigeria is that many of the people stay at home, complain in their bedroom, and so the arena of public life is essentially an arena of plunder. Most people who make, I'm not joking about this. If you really do psychological testing for many people who are politicians, the leading politicians in Nigeria, I think we proved that many of them are mentally unwell. But we take it for granted that they're just politicians. And so they determine our life, shape our future. You know, look at these guys. If you think of the kind of obscene amounts of money they steal, and you try to find out what they do with the money, really, I'm not joking, what they do with the money. They always look more wretched than you. With all they are taking straight from the treasury. So why are they taking it? At best, they buy a house for a useless girl. So these guys are mentally unwell, but we don't test them. So we allow them, and then we all have to be yoked unduly by their unfortunate situations. Because of this kind of environment, ideas and policies are just jettisoned. They don't think through it. They don't understand it. Why would they implement it? It doesn't make any sense to them because the capacity to understand it does not exist. So we need a elite consensus, and all of us, and that's the point I was making about Habermas and rational public conversation, to create elite consensus.
Okay. There are many questions. I'm trying to sort them out to see which ones should push forward in the next few minutes. It says, how do we change this current structure of education, knowing that the current structure of education is not good for our development?
Yeah. You know, first of all, we've got to make the kind of decision China made in the 70s on that Deng. We have to realize, really, again, elite consensus, that education is central to any progress we make. And then we've got to create champions, people who are really committed to driving education. The way, again, Deng, I think, let's just go and look at the model of what happened to China in the 1970s, and we'll see where we should be going. I mean, instead of spending a lot of time talking about it, let me just cut it to that.
Okay.
Because how can you have an education system which in 1961, an Oxford educator called Eric Ashby said was as good as one of the best in the world, and that in 1961 it was easier to enter Harvard and to enter University of Ibadan. And then one generation later, the place is completely gone. So surely we need to return to some basic thinking. And I think that if we borrow from other models and then get some of our own creative people to refresh it, we must then get the policymakers to drive it. Because right now, my view is that, look, we don't need the National Assembly we have now. It's not likely to take us anywhere. We have to find some way of breaking this system down and beginning afresh.
Okay. Someone is asking, what kind of economic principle is good for Nigeria from your experience and background?
Well, you see, economics is about pragmatism. It's not that there's one global principle that's good or bad. You've got to be pragmatic and look at developments and make the right choices. Western economic philosophy, as I said earlier, driven largely by the laissez-faire doctrine out of Adam Smith, often leads to the fact that most people who even study economics and the Western model don't even know somebody who was nearly a contemporary of Adam Smith, a German, who disagreed with the Adam Smith doctrine, called Frederick List. Now, Frederick List essentially makes the point that Adam Smith was essentially trying to impose on the unarmed and an armistice, and so they take what has been success already in Europe and impose it on the rest of the world. There are alternatives that have worked, and we see it in the case of South Korea as a classic example. There's a South Korean-born economist at Cambridge called Ye-Ju Chang. He has written a very interesting book that's titled Bad Samaritans. He argues in Bad Samaritans, Chang, and actually I have a photograph of Chang and myself in Russia last year in one of these places here. He argues essentially that South Korea would never have grown if it listened to Western economics. And they basically had industrial policy that blocked their economy off in areas and developed it. Now, I agree with Chang in many things, but not completely, because that philosophy can lead to what we experience here, which is permanent infant industry. My thesis, which incidentally is more closely aligned with that of Justin Lin. Justin Lin is the Chinese professor of economics who became chief economist at the World Bank for a short period and returned. Is currently the chairman of China's vice chairman, all China industry, and has a budget of $60 billion from China to create industrial parks in Africa. And he can't even manage to get our people to even understand what he's trying to do. Now, that thesis is based on what is called latent comparative advantage. Latent comparative advantage essentially says, take an endowment. I have a number of favorite endowments. Let's take something as simple as sesame seeds. Develop your global value chain on sesame seeds, including the processing, adding value, and all of that. Even orient the education system of Benue, where they use the thing to make soup, such that they are focused, the young people in primary school are focused on how to process sesame seeds. And then you become leader in sesame oil, all the McDonald's hamburgers in Europe that have sesame seed on their bun, you are the one supplying them, blah, blah, blah. Before you know it, the productivity increases on the value chain of just sesame seed in Nigeria. Drive wealth, drive higher incomes, all kinds of things. So anyway.
Okay. I think we'll bring the questions gradually to a close, maybe two more, and then we'll end. Somebody says, with the likes of Bismarck Riwane on the Economic Advisory Committee of the President, is there any hope? Isn't there any hope that something good will come out of that? And what can we begin to do immediately after this lockdown to regain our economy?
You should talk to Bismarck online and you will not stop laughing. Offline, Bismarck and I had a whale of like 1 hour of laughing day before yesterday night. This man basically thinks Nigeria is bankrupt right now. But see, the truth of the matter is that we need to implement the principle of subsidiarity. Let's take decision making around the economy down to literally local government level, the states, all of this, and get serious thinking. Right now, they all go to Abuja. You know, the governors don't think just how much can I collect from federation account until we can move policies down that direction. Now, let me just tell you, when I heard the committee announced, I burst out laughing. What is that committee going to discuss that Tulipe Silva or Akpabio or Amici will pay attention to? The agenda is completely different. So you make those kind of people, the people who implement what Kriwani and Co are discussing, it is a joke. It will not happen. So we're just in a self-masturbation, deceit cycle. You got to clear these guys out of government. Fight bright young boys like Diolu, Chudejidawo, and Co. to come in as ministers who can be influenced. So look, Diolu, this is what you do. According to policy, he says, okay, I can relate to it. Yes, I'll go and do it. Not an Akpabio who has taken how many billion already looking for where to make up for how much he spent in the last election, how much he spent bribing to be made a minister, and all that kind of nonsense. You're not going to make any progress. So it's a waste of time.
Okay, so there are so many questions here. I'm tempted to send them to you so that I don't know if we can do another 1 or 2 recordings to address some of these. There are plenty of questions, over 80 questions now.
Just summarize again. Forward to me the questions. Maybe if we get a chance again, sometime in a week or whatever,
okay,
we can have another session, just Q&A.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is really, really showing here is people are a bit worried about, so already now, April, some companies will not pay salaries. Some people will.
Sorry?
I said end of this April, some companies will not pay salaries.
Yes.
Some people are not earning on a day basis already. Now, and if there's so much cluelessness in our leadership, if there's so much, lack of coordination at the national, state, local government sides of things, what can the ordinary citizen do? Yes, we've heard you said, probably needs to get out this economic class, this political class, and replace them, mute the Senate meetings and all that. But what practical things can we do? Or do we recommend to the government, or how do we agitate for what we need so that, yes, we know before this COVID, our reserves were already depleted. We're already, touching the bottom of our reserves. So
already in the brink of bankruptcy.
Yeah. So without COVID, we will be in a financial mess. But what can
anyway
the ordinary person do? Where is hope? Yeah. How do we get hope in these times? Or is it a time?
We still have to ask ourselves, what do we have the capacity to produce that somebody else needs? If it is packaging Gary nicely enough that the people in diaspora will be eating it, and we can ship it out to them, we can be making money doing that. The last time I remember we were in this kind of complete mess, import licenses were hard to come by. Those who had resorted to import licensing, of course, that was the tradition of those days. It might come back, by the way. This one that central bank is giving to their friends at one price, and people are making money from foreign exchange. We might get to a stage with oil at $20 that in the next few months, central bank will not be able to meet our foreign exchange needs. But we might return to, sadly, import licensing or some crazy thing like that, rationing. When we get to that stage, which was the stage we were in the 1980s. My example is of a guy called Charles Anudu, who works for a company called Me and Baker. And he was in my class, and we're talking about the challenges farmers used to buy herbicides and pesticides from the World Bank ADP program. Now the ADP programs had run out. Governments did not assure continuity. The farmers had learned to use pesticides. They found the value. But me and Baker was selling drums, and farmers couldn't afford to buy a drum of pesticide or herbicide. He tried to persuade his company to make small packages. Paris said to him, "We don't do that kind of thing." When he said that in class, it was 1994. Many people in the class suggested that he leave the business, set up his own company to package small, bring in generics, package them in small packages and sell to farmers. He took their advice, he resigned his job, and all those in the class who were bankers, when he called them, they all disappeared. Nigerian banking for you. But he believed enough in what he had set out to do that he borrowed money from a finance house at 13% a month to import generics and package them into small bottles, and personally with his team go into villages and sell them to farmers. To get even the foreign exchange to import the generics was a challenge. So he began to gather rubber from Cross River State. He would export the rubber, and the dollar he got from the export of the rubber, he used to bring in these generics. Within 4 years, the company he founded, called Candel, overtook Me and Baker, his former multinational company, in the pesticides, herbicides area. I think there's enough genius in most of our young people to do those same kinds of things in many areas of our economy. And that's where the rebuilding may come from.
Okay. Okay. I think finally, someone says, Prof, some of us learned that you are among those who drew up the present government manifesto.
Sorry?
Someone said, Prof, some of us learned that you are among those who drew up the present government manifesto. If that is true, do you see this administration's economic policy in line with the manifesto? Secondly, how do we make this kind of discussion you talked about possible?
Because of my conversation, I talked about it. I said that the vice president, I don't know who asked him to why he did it, about 4 months ago, found the need to say that the thing was done in my house. That's why when I was speaking earlier, I said that the thing which was drawn up here, the vice president, Wale Edun, and myself were the ones who wrote this part of the manifesto. But it was clear that from the very beginning, they wanted both Wale and I far away from the government. And they deliberately did that from the day Buhari was elected to keep us out. And I quietly stayed in my house and left them alone. I think now everybody's chewing in their own juice.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. I'll aggregate the questions together and try and find the most occurring ones and send to you. Maybe we'll do another recording. Any parting shots before we close it this afternoon? What can we hope in? What should we be doing? How do we ensure our livelihoods are not lost in this lockdown?
That's the point. That's really the point. The point to bear in mind is not to take an us-them mentality. Ultimately, we are affected. Our lives, our children's futures are at stake. So we must all put on our thinking caps, almost in the manner of the pedagogy of the determined. Ask ourselves, how can we reconstruct this country, this economy, in our own self-interest. And we will find leagues of people we can collaborate with to create new kinds of value. Unfortunately, our banking system doesn't work for us. Our banking system was designed, one of my big pains about the banking system, I've played in that system, is that the banking system was designed to be a rent system or importing petrol. And we all know that these people who are importing the petrol will bring in petrol, drive out of the country or sail out of the country, come back in, charge the government 3 times. So everybody who is a petroleum marketer is a very rich person. It's the only Nigeria that I know that just to sell petrol makes you rich. The truth of the petroleum marketing business is that the margins are so thin that in fact it was literally on account of that, literally, that the balance scorecard was created, because ExxonMobil didn't know what it was doing in retailing petrol because the margins were so thin. And it was from there that the logic of, okay, the good thing about petrol is that it generates a lot of traffic. Everybody used to buy petrol, so everybody comes to the petrol station. So because competition makes the margin so thin, why don't you sell something else to them while they are there to buy petrol? That's why you will see Minimart, Bonjour. Those petrol stations make more money from the margins in those shops that they make from selling petrol. But in Nigeria, because of corruption and collusion between petroleum marketers and NNPC people, if you say somebody's in petroleum marketing, they say, ah, he's a rich man, and he usually is. So Nigerian banking became part of the support system for all of that. So bankers became celebrities, fancy suits, sirens to escort EDs and MDs, while adding very little value to the Nigerian economy. Take anything that will create long-term value to a bank in Nigeria and you are stuck. They will play games with you forever. Like I said, I'm talking as one who has been on the board of banks. And I find this so depressing, unfortunately. The reform will start from banking. Indeed, many people who have just recently lost, I was talking to 1 or 2 former bank GMs who lost their jobs in the last couple of months. What a few of them have gone is going to credit businesses, lending money to small market women. And I think those can be the nucleus of our financing will grow back into a value machine, different from these fancy things that these are our big banks constitute today. And then they will find people who want to grow cashew nuts, and they will partner with them to grow cashew nuts over 5 years and sell them to those who process them and make money. And that's where the future lies. Dirtying our hands, creating real wealth. This fancy business of staying in some office in Lagos and playing big man is not how wealth is created.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. It's been quite loaded this afternoon. It is, of course, I also knew that we are just going to be able to do a little in the 1 hour, 30 minutes that we have had together. I'll try and aggregate the questions together and see what we can do after now. Thanks so much for the clarity given to how we need to learn, the pedagogy of we determine how we need to ensure we participate and not make it us versus them, and try and begin to get involved in how our country will move forward. I'm going to allow a few comments generally so that people can just express their gratitude so that everybody can share with everybody and say, thank you for what you have done. Thank you very much. We appreciate. Thank you very much, Prof. Have a beautiful rest of the day. We appreciate.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So everybody else, thanks for coming in today. it's been fun having us all around. I'm sure many people have been sending messages to say how do they connect, how do they stay in touch, how do they ensure that they can follow up with getting the audio recording and the rest of them. The recording